Hello and welcome back to Gooder's Front Room. Today we're going to have a whistle stop tour through the James Bond film opening title sequences and sort of have a look at how they've developed over the years, starting way back in 1962 with the first film Doctor No. Now, there was a chap by the name of Maurice Binder who worked on these opening sequences for many, many years. He started with the first film and was responsible for these opening sequences right up until License to Kill. And then after that, from sort of GoldenEye forward, each film is handled by a different person or a different kind of effects house. But yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail looking at each of the sequences, but it should hopefully be quite interesting and quite fun just to kind of see them all together and see how things kind of developed across the course of the franchise. So first up we have, of course, Doctor No from 1962, which has the first example of the gun barrel sequence as its kind of opening moment. And then we kick into the James Bond theme, which is always going to be a fantastic piece of music. But the sort of title design themselves are very different from what will follow later on. This is before Ben has really found his style. But I do quite like it. It's very 60s. It's very of its age. Very colourful. The strange thing about the sequence for Doctor No, though, is it's kind of a three-part thing with some kind of slightly jarring transitions between pieces of music, as well as kind of style of the graphics that's being used. We have the kind of the opening section with the Bond theme, as mentioned, and then this kind of gives way into a kind of Caribbean-esque piece of music. Before it transitions into somewhat oddly three blind mice and three old men, and then this is what sort of transitions into the actual opening film of the film itself. So yeah, I mean, very much early days. They decide clearly off the back of this that they want a kind of animated title sequence, and that's something they're going to carry forward. But we've not really got any of the hallmarks in place yet of what would come to be expected of a James Bond theme opening.
Calypso beat all the while. They're looking for the cat that swallowed the rat. They want to show that cat the attitude of three blind mice.
And a year later, From Russia with Love would pretty much establish a lot of the sort of core templates of what we would see in James Bond's title opening sequences going forwards. And that's the use of scantily clad women. This time it's just a bit of sort of projection with the titles and the credits being projected onto some belly dancers. It does kind of give a bit of a flavour of a section of the film, which is the section with the gypsy camp, but it doesn't really kind of go beyond that. It's just that kind of one element that Binder is using in the theme here for his sequence. So yeah, it's still, kind of fairly basic, not too over elaborate. And again, we've just got a piece of music which is instrumental, so we've not really got the idea of the James Bond theme music for each individual entry yet, but that will come in the next entry. So yeah, I quite like these ones. They're, you know, nice and clean, quite simple, not over elaborate, and yeah, it's something a bit different to a lot of title sequences you would have seen at the time. Goldfinger is the film that pretty much established the Bond's template that would be followed for the next 20-30 years. And that goes as far as the sort of title sequences as well. So of course we've got Shirley Bassey singing the title track, and it has gone down, rightly so, as a famous piece of film music. Again, we've got the concept of projecting things onto the figures of various beautiful women, and it's taken the step further this time of it being actual images from the film. So we're kind of definitely moving towards that concept of the credit opening sequence really kind of locking into the theme of the film. Of course, all of the models have been given a golden hue in the lighting as well. So again, this is another fairly simple, straightforward sequence that I think works pretty well. It's quite laid back, but it still has energy in it, which is down to Bassey's performance of Goldfinger. And notably, this is, I would say, still, if not quite tasteful, but it's certainly more tasteful than a lot of kind of later entries. Certainly as we sort of moved in through the sort of the 80s ones, they got a bit more, risque is not the correct word, but a bit more sleazy even with the use of the models. But this one I think works well. Of course, it ties into that image of the woman covered in gold, dead on the bed. (1965's) Thunderball. This is sort of Binder moving very much towards the sort of pattern that he would become locked into up until Goldeneye, where somebody else took the reins. We have the silhouettes of the naked women contrasted against kind of solid blocks of colour, along with kind of imagery that kind of ties into the theme of the film. Obviously, in this case, Thunderball is very aquatic, very based around kind of underwater manoeuvring. So that's what we get in the images. But this one, again, I think is pretty good. It doesn't go sort of too overboard with the kind of, I guess, titillation fact. The sort of the black on solid colour works well, and the kind of bursts of bubbles occasionally in the frame add another sort of layer to it.
He strikes like thunder.
But it has to be said that Tom Jones's Thunderball is a bit too much of a conscious effort just to sort of recapture the theme to Goldfinger. It's very stylistically the same in terms of its musical setup and production. So You Only Live Twice from 67 is the first example we have, I think, of the title sequence containing elements that can or that do potentially give away sort of elements of the plot of the film that aren't immediately clear, because we have this big theme throughout the sequence of lava and volcanoes, which of course for the majority of the film it would not be clear the first time you saw it why that connects into the film. Elsewhere, we have the connection to the kind of Japanese setting with the use of the fans and the kind of geisha type images here, which apparently is very much like the original novel. Screenwriter Roald Dahl complained the original novel was basically just a travelogue from Fleming's sort of experience of Japan. He was so excited about it, he just kind of wrote about it and then just kind of bolted on a loose Bond story to it. And we have Nancy Sinatra with You Only Live Twice, which is a nice change after Goldfinger and Thunderbolt. They've not attempted to just kind of recapture the same kind of bombastic ballad as before. They've gone for something that feels a bit different, which I think works for the film. It adds this kind of sense of slight mystery. I think the nature of the song is kind of slightly aching and kind of evokes, unknown dangers. But this is another title sequence which for me works well, and of course this is a film that does have some elements that don't work so well, like disguising Sean Connery as a Japanese man, and obviously some legendary elements. But yeah, that's You Only Live Twice.
Make one dream come true. You only live twice.
So up next was On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and of course this is the switch where Sean Connery has now in theory left, and we've got a new James Bond, and that is something they kind of lean into, with the sense that the James Bond figure in this title sequence is always kind of facing away or running away, and we don't get a clean look at him. It is quite late 60s, early 70s, and I'm not sure why they kind of go for the kind of reuse of imagery from previous films. I guess this is to kind of ram home the idea that the character is still the same character, that this is still the same film series, because I think there was quite a lot of paranoia from the producers around, switching out the lead actor and what that would do to audiences' interests. What works less well here is that the use of the models. They just seem to be in here because it's felt like there needs to be that element in here. Nothing clever or interesting is done with the element this time. It's just kind of an angle of, oh look, naked women, basically. So this is one of the less effective title sequences. It's quite a strange one overall. It does feel almost like Binder didn't really know what to do for this one. Like, he couldn't pick out like a core theme that he could really kind of lean into anywhere from the film. The film itself is a pretty good thriller. Suffers a little bit from Lazenby being a bit wooden, but he's not terrible. And I think it would have been good to have seen him come back. Diamonds Are Forever, of course, as another classic Shirley Bassey performance for the theme song. I like the way the sequence itself sort of opens up by focusing into the cat's eyes and then pulling back out again. So we're getting the start of the kind of blurring in and out of the film of these sequences, rather than just basically hard cuts, from the prologue to the title sequence, back to the film. We're starting to blend them together. Unfortunately, the rest of the sequence away from Bassey's performance of the theme tune, it's overall not that interesting, I would say. Leans obviously heavily into the diamond theming of the film, and obviously that that's a key element of the plot. But it's got some weird kind of freeze frame moments in here. It's not as visually dynamic as a lot of the previous sequences so far. The colours are quite muted, muddy here. It's less striking. It's less pop art. We're kind of moving away from the pop art feel of the previous entries and moving into something a bit different now. And again, it does feel like Binder's added in the silhouetted, and at times not so silhouetted, naked models just for the sake of adding them in. It doesn't seem to have anything really to do with them. They just kind of wave their hands about a bit.
I don't need love. For what good will love do me? Diamonds never lie to me. For when love's gone, they last on. Diamonds are forever, forever, forever. Diamonds are forever, 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 forever.
And yeah, here we go. This is the 70s arriving.
You used to say, live and let live. But if this ever-changing world in which we live in makes you give in and cry.
With Live and Let Die. We've got a title theme which is very different. It's the introduction, of course, of Roger Moore. We're back to colours which are much stronger, much more vibrant. The theming of the film is lent on again with the kind of voodoo element. I like the flashes to the skull. Obviously, looking back at it now, some of the kind of imagery around, the voodoo aspects is possibly problematic. But there's an energy to this sequence. And it's quite surreal in places, with the use of the fire, I like to say the skull imagery, even the kind of choreography of the sort of dance movements are quite violence, not the word, but the very high energy, very different. But we possibly are also getting a little bit more lurid with some of the work around the silhouettes and the models. In places, Binder does seem to be pushing the limits of what he can get away with showing in terms of like a whole body. Like how much can he imply and how much can he actually show? He seems to be pushing those limits a little bit.
Live and let die. Live and let die.
And then the man with the golden gun has a lot of the same kind of energy, has a lot of the same energy as Live and Let Die did. But the factor that would probably come up a lot moving forward, that really sort of comes in this entry, is the basically phallic treatment of the gun. I mean, it seems like an obvious thing to do, I guess, for Binder with a film called The Man with the Golden Gun. And of course the theme song sung by Lulu is full of innuendo about banging and shooting and love being required for the assassin to do his thing. I am a little surprised that there isn't more sort of in this sequence that evokes the largely Thailand setting of the film. Like they did evoke the Japanese feel of You Only Live Twice. And here we go, yeah, very much the phallic treatment of the weapon here. And instead of having the models completely in silhouette, Bender starts to experiment with having some coy placements of other elements to hide over, the naughty bits. Then we have the spy who loved me. And this is one of the strange ones that kind of almost sucks the energy out of the start of the film. It's partly because of the kind of slow ballad, theme song that we have here. But it's also sort of, combined with the visuals, everything is moving pretty slowly. It's all the visual elements are quite, sounds strange, quite sedate. Everything is sort of slow moving. But yeah, apart from that, we've got, again, good use of kind of strong basic colours that help sort of really strike a sort of contrast with the silhouetted figures. It's one where we get quite a lot of Bond himself in these silhouettes, which is not something that we commonly see. So it's a bit different for that. But yeah, overall, yeah, this one, it kind of not great. I don't think this particular title sequence. Uh, and then we have Moonraker, which is very Moonraker. It starts, off from a comedy bit with some comedy, sound effects. It's got the kind of weird, like, sort of photo negative images of Roger Moore, which aren't as effective as just the plain silhouettes. Again, it's another title sequence that sort of sucks the film of energy. Got another kind of slow ballad for the title song. It's surprising how little the sequence, evokes the space theming of the film. We don't get a huge amount of it.
I've seen your smile in 1,000 dreams, felt your touch, and it always
I guess this lady here is supposed to be kind of like a rocket. I guess that's the idea. I'm not sure about the sort of red and blue colouring, what that is supposed to be evoking. I mean, this is a lovely disco ball here, catching up to the disco wave a bit late, I guess. But then Moonraker is a film of sort of grasping for popular trends, possibly at the wrong moment. I think we do have some attempts at kind of illustrating zero gravity, but the problem being it's not strongly differentiated off from kind of the gymnastics that we've seen in previous sequences. So not a great one, this one.
in 1,000 dreams, felt your touch, and it always seemed
For Yours Eyes Only was something of a course correction for the franchise as a whole, steering back to a more low-key, inverted commas, realistic, thriller after Moonraker's laser fights in space. And the interesting thing here, this is the only title sequence in the entire franchise where the artist performing the song is actually seen on screen. I'm not sure why they went for that choice, but it makes the title sequence feel a bit different. I guess it almost feels like a music video in itself. And it's another sequence where I think, Binder has struggled to identify anything in the film that he can really kind of use as a theme for this sequence, because there isn't really any theme here. I guess we get some water elements because the film's kind of, I guess, pivotal moments at the start do involve a boat. But otherwise we're leaning on the old models doing gymnastics or striking poses with a gun. It was interesting actually, how much the water element is used when there isn't that much kind of aquatic elements in the film. I think this is Binder just reverting to type and doing what he knows he can do rather than coming up with anything new. Then we have Octopussy, which is very 80s. Very 80s, from the heavy sort of saxophone use in the song to, you know, the overall film of itself. And we've almost kind of gone back in time here, when the sequence is just kind of, again, elements being sort of laser projected this time onto models. So we're sort of really going back to, you know, From Russia with Love, with that element. We do get some sort of thematic elements from the film. There's some, you know, circus performance kind of vibe going on, which of course ties into, you know, the back end of the film in particular. But again, we've seen gymnastics being done before in these sequences, so it's nothing particularly new. And, you know, the suggestive elements of it are getting increasingly deliberately lewd, shall we say, in places. Again, we have one of these, you know, negative images of Roger Moore, which I really don't like. They look cheap, they look out of place. But overall, I think this is another sequence. This is quite weak, quite uninteresting generally overall. Do you think we got to a point where Binder would just kind of keep repeating what he'd done before without putting a huge amount of imagination into it? But we've only got another handful of his ones that are left. I think with A View to a Kill, we're back to some more high energy, no doubt helped by the theme song this time around. The sequence does lean quite heavily into sort of elements of fire and ice. I'm not entirely sure why. That's not like a kind of a huge sort of element in the film. I'm surprised they didn't go for something based around equestrian kind of themes. But we are at least getting the models doing more interesting things. The choreography is, you know, a bit more than them just kind of either doing a flip or just kind of running through flame or just running through the frame. And the use of the body paint is quite striking. And I will totally admit, the fairly young lad watching this film, it's one of the ones I used to watch quite often. That particular open sequence of the ski suit being opened made me feel new things as a young lad. I mean, we're really gone for the skiing thing, and I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, we've kind of transitioned, I guess, from a sequence where there's been skiing, but that's all the skiing that's in the film, so I'm not sure why we've really kind of gone with this as a theme. Now the Timothy Dalton era, can we call it an era when it was only two films? But yeah, the Timothy Dalton films were much more grounded than what had a lot of what had come before. License to Kill in particular. Obviously the Living Daylights, still had its sort of more fantastical moments. And we're well into the 80s now, which I think you can kind of sense in the graphics that are used here. Particularly the sunglasses. We're really leaning on strategically placed bits of paint or whatever to hide up just straight outright nudity. Now you do kind of get the feeling that increasingly they've been struggling to think about what to do, so they're kind of pushing the limits in that frame. It's another sequence which does its thing but doesn't really evoke much of the film that it's coming ahead of. I think, which is a shame, because this theme song I think is, for me, controversially, is possibly actually the best Bond theme song. So it's a bit of a shame that it's served by an intro sequence visually that isn't very interesting. Then we have License to Kilt, which is what I hear in this song still to this day every time. The use of the sort of casino images, liven things up a bit, make it a bit more interesting. Do kind of tie it a little stronger into, at least a part of the film. But again, it's another one where there's so much more that could have been done to sort of connect it into a film that's going to follow on. As we go through, it really is that the films that or the sequences that do do a little bit more to sort of invoke the films that they're coming at the head of, that are the more interesting sequences. Um, Again, this one is fairly boring. It's fairly dull. It's just pistols firing and models running around and jumping. And then coming back after a 6-year gap, which at this point was the longest gap between the Bond films, we have GoldenEye. And I would say that the title sequences get much more interesting from this point forward. They have a lot more going on in them in terms of the visual elements. You know, already we've got the firewall going on. We've had the sort of bullets zoom past us. We're still keeping up at this point with the silhouetted naked model, which had become a bit of a Bond cliche, I guess, at this point. But we do have a lot more going on. I mean, we've got the obvious use of a golden eye, but I really like the kind of symbolism that gets brought in here around the kind of concept of the collapsing USSR, with the various communist bits of iconography, crashing to the ground. That's a really interesting element, and it does tie into some parts of the film thematically. This kind of concept of Russia as a fading power. A lot of inspiration for the sequence, clearly comes from the scenes that have been filmed in the graveyard of statues. But whilst we have the motif of guns and naked models, we've got a lot more going on. The models have got some proper kind of choreography going on instead of just gymnastic twirls. It's actually a bit more kind of restrained than some of Maurice Binder's later efforts, where things are firmly pretty much silhouetted. We're not going basically full on nudity, but with some very sort of coyly placed sections. So yeah, this is much stronger, more dynamic. And obviously things are being helped out, of course, by the advancing in technology of effects work. Though, having mentioned sort of advancing technology and effects work helping out the title sequences, they possibly went a bit too heavy with the CGI for Tomorrow Never Dies in parts of it. You can see what they're going for. They're evoking that element of media and computerization and all these kind of factors. But there's kind of the earlier sequences that are a bit easier on the eye, shall we say. I quite like the sort of X-ray effect on the weaponry. Yeah, and here we go with the kind of lawnmower man-esque elements. And whilst it's a song that often gets stuck in my head, I'm not sure how well Sheryl Crow's Tomorrow Never Dies, theme song works. It's got some interesting sort of changes of pace in the music. But again, it's another one of those ones that it kind of drains energy out of the film because it is a slow-paced ballad. something that definitely is a factor in the kind of later title sequences in the franchise that sometimes doesn't work to the benefit is how visually busy a lot of the frames become a lot of the time. And next up is The World Is Not Enough, which is another one of these ones that kind of gives some elements away of the film, because the sequence really leans into kind of oil related imagery. And up to this point, of course, in the film, you don't really know that oil and oil pipelines is going to be a sort of a central plot element of things. And because of it, it's quite a freaky sequence with these kind of, you know, figures dripping with oil. I think is quite a surreal image that it conjures. Further made to look sort of trippy by the almost, you know, 60s background of mixed colours. Of course, there's the idea being that it's that kind of oil slick rainbow that you get. I do like Garbage's theme song here. It's a ballad, but it's not a sort of hugely slow one. It's still got energy in it, and a kind of strangely threatening tone to it. And yeah, really, by the end of the sequence, if you don't know that oil's going to be involved, you're really not being paying attention. I'm sure this kind of spurt here is slightly suggestive, and that is fully intentional. But I'm not so keen on this kind of later section with the kind of figures all start blending into each other. It gets a bit too crowded visually for me. But I would put it, I think, ahead of Tomorrow Never Dies' opening sequence. Then we have possibly the worst title sequence out of all of them. Part of that is definitely because of the awful title track. This style of electro pop just has not aged well. That sort of constant staggering and stopping sort of sound of it, the heavy modification of Madonna's voice just doesn't work anymore. And this is definitely a sequence which gets too crowded visually. There are too many elements kind of layered on top of each other a lot of the time. This is actually the first sequence in the franchise that continues to tell the story of their film. Of course, because the prologue ends up with Bond being captured, and throughout the sequence we're kind of following, you know, his captivity and what happens to him during this captivity. And it's just, it's not great, is it? I mean, we're supposed to be kind of following along what's happening to him, but it's been kind of overlaid with all these other elements. Again, the kind of the CGI that's been used in a lot of this is not aged particularly well either. And we have all this kind of image of ice and fire, which I guess is supposed to evoke the kind of torture methods, I guess, that's being used on Bond. Because it's not connected that much to anything else, I guess, in the film. I guess we have the Ice Palace later on, so that could be part of it. But no, I don't like this sequence at all. And as you can probably tell, I don't like the film at all. It's not a good film. So the excesses of Die Another Day led to another franchise reset, which is what happens through the franchise. It gets kind of crazier and crazier, and then resets back to something more grounded. So we have Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's first entry. And yeah, we've had another step change in what these title sequences deliver. Gone is the idea of naked silhouetted models dancing around. That element just isn't here. We've got some heavy theming with the suits from the cards. Obviously the film being largely based around the central poker game. And I really like the kind of these animations, breaking up into the diamonds there, and it's keeping the energy up along with the Cross Canal theme song. So it's keeping the momentum going for a new era, as well as sort of telling us that, you know, we're in for something different, because we have moved away from, you know, what people expect from these title sequences. And it's a really strong entry. And whilst there are a lot of, you know, elements on screen, it never feels visually too busy, which has been smartly done. Following up was Quantum of Solace, which, you know, overall is a a film is which overall as a film is less strong. With the intro sequence, I actually really like the theme song here, although I know a lot of people don't like this effort from Jack White and Alicia Keys, but I do. And we're continuing the modern approach to the title sequences, where there's a lot of connection into the film going on. So we've got the desert landscape, which of course plays a big part in the film, and we've kind of reintroduced slight elements of the kind of naked models, here and there, but it's not too heavily used. And where we have got it, it is sort of connected in, to this desert imagery, so it's maintaining that thematic link. Until we sort of get into the later parts of the sequence where it sort of resembles an older James Bond sequence almost, to some elements. I think the part that lets kind of the sequence down overall though is the kind of the feel of the ever shifting camera that's kind of seems to be zooming us around. It's almost a little bit nausea inducing. Skyfall is an interesting one. It's a very kind of interpretive kind of sequence. It's kind of invoking this concept of James Bond is at a kind of an ending, and that he might not be what he used to be. The models have come back, but again it's not sort of too heavily used. We've got the kind of more kind of almost surrealist imagery, as we transition from underwater through the graves. The kind of burning red here, which evokes the ending of the film. And whereas Quantum of Solace's sort of camera movement was a bit disorientating, this is much stronger in that respect. It's like it's kind of taking us through a narrative moving forwards rather than just kind of spinning around all over the place. And combined with Adele's title track, the whole sequence has a kind of haunting vibe to it. though this section does remind me of the Red Hot Chili Peppers music video that was also used that kaleidoscope effect. And then with No Time to Die, in theory coming later this year, last up for now is Spectre, which follows on from the sequence in Skyfall. It's got a very similar feel, that kind of very similar. It's kind of telling us a bit of a story about the character, but using some kind of fairly interpretive imagery to do that. We're very much getting this kind of message of, again, James Bond is facing a big emotional kind of moment. It has to be said though that the kind of octopus tentacle parts of it give it a bit of a kind of a Cthulhu-esque Lovecraft-ish kind of feeling. Maybe might put you in mind of some of the stranger aspects of Japanese animation. And again, a bit like on Her Majesty's Secret Service, we've got a bit of a kind of a recap of events here. But I think this works because, Spectre does feel like kind of the end of a story arc for Daniel Craig's James Bond. So I think it makes sense to have a bit of a kind of a recap of the story so far in the sequence. I think that works this time around. It seems to serve a purpose rather than in on Her Majesty's Secret Service, where it just seemed to be there for the lack of anything else to do. We have recurring imagery of a skull alongside the recurring image of the octopus, and again, it's another sequence which is quite creepy, almost unnerving. This almost could be like a horror movie. We do have like a dash of the classic Bond naked models in here, but again, it keeps up that creepy element even when they appear, because they appear to be getting shot. And as much as I didn't really like the reveal of Blofeld being behind everything, like in the film, I like this kind of reveal of him in the title sequence. That's a nice little moment. But overall, for sort of James Bond title sequences, I think, since we got to what I would call the modern era in GoldenEye, or with GoldenEye, I think signals the modern era, I think the title sequence has got much more interesting as an element of the film. So there we go. That's all of the opening title sequences that we've had so far. Obviously, No Time to Die is coming out later this year. Well, hopefully it is. So will be one more to add to the list. But hopefully that's been quite an interesting thing to go through and see them all chained together like that, to see things develop and change over the years, and how each decade kind of left its imprint on the films. Do let me know which sequence is your favourite or which is your least favourite, and I'll be back with some more James Bond related goodness fairly soon.